Our senior thesis defense challenge for 2022. Rachel Gokenauer, and her topic is hormonal birth control. Do the ends justify the means? Give a hand for Rachel.
Yeah, Rachel.
Hello, my name is Rachel Gokenauer, as you can hear it being shouted from many, many different people. But before I get started, I would just like to thank many people. First and foremost being God, because without him, I don't think I'd be here in front of you all today. I personally do not like public speaking, so he's definitely working for me right now if he wants to be talking in front of you. I'd also like to thank my parents, because they've always encouraged me to trust my gut and to follow what I believe in. So without them, I definitely wouldn't have wrote this paper. Okay, and I guess I will begin. In regards to birth control, Margaret Sanger once said, quote, no woman can be free until she, I'm just gonna read it because I can't remember it. No woman can call herself free who does not own and control her body. No woman can call herself free until she can consciously choose whether she will or will not be a mother. And our society continues to feed women this idea that in order for them to be free, they need to be able to choose when they want to conceive a child. And doctors will propagate the viability of hormonal birth control, making it one of the most used contraceptive methods out there. And along with it preventing pregnancy, they prescribe it to numerous women who suffer from severe menstrual symptoms. But despite what doctors say, women have expressed that hormonal contraception has affected them negatively with their weight, their mental health, and their libido, and more. But doctors, in response, will brush it off, saying that it's normal, or they will prescribe a completely different type of hormonal contraceptive. But this should raise question. This should raise a question of why women should use hormonal birth control if it has such negative effects on them. Well, we can start off with its foundation. There were three prominent people in the history of hormonal birth control: Margaret Sanger, a feminist, and the leader of the birth control movement, and the two scientists, George Pincus and John Rock, who researched it. Well, Margaret Sanger believed that birth control should be used to weed out the unfit and those with disabilities. She also believed that we were overpopulated, so she believed that we should exterminate the African American population. Next would be the two scientists, George Pincus and John Rock. They performed numerous tests on women, using them as guinea pigs without giving them their full informed consent, essentially abusing them. Second of all, hormonal birth control negatively affects women's bodies. It increases the risk of blood clots in women and was pronounced a carcinogen, which increases the risk of breast and cervical cancer. It can also affect mutual attraction between men and women, which can affect their relationships and the offspring of that future couple's children. And lastly, hormonal contraception influences women's brains. It actually disrupts oxytocin signaling, which can affect the women's relationships and bonding with their partner and their newborn babies. It also shuts down women's cortisol response to stress, and it increases depression and suicide in women. So these are the reasons why I believe hormonal birth control should not be used. And women, they deserve to know the truth. They deserve to know their own bodies. Women deserve to feel and be free without it costing them their physical and mental health. Thank you. I'm ready for questions.
So why did you choose this topic?
That's a good question. Well, I've always found women's rights issues have been something I've always been passionate about. Like in Challenge 2 with the art grant idea, I did it on promoting awareness to sex trafficking in women. And then in Challenge 3 when we did the speech, I'm not sure what it was about, but my topic was on abortion. And so I found that I've really been affected by women's rights, and I come from a family of brothers. So when they have the same beliefs as I do, but when they try to talk to people about it, they go, you have no uterus, therefore you have no opinion. I took that personally because I was like, that's my brother's. What they're saying makes sense. So I was like, well, I'm a young woman. I have a uterus. So why don't you listen to my opinion? And so that's kind of why I went into this topic. To spread more awareness and to hopefully bring awareness that it not only affects women, and it can affect men too, and men deserve to have a voice.
Kind of a similar question. When I read through this, I kept expecting there to be some kind of religious or moral part to it, and it seems that you purposely stayed away from that, and you were very factual and very scientific in your explanation. Is there a reason why you stay far away?
Yeah, so when I was first deciding to do it, I was like, well, a lot of my belief on why women shouldn't do it came from religion, what God says. But then if I were to go in front of a woman and say, well, you know, I believe God says that you shouldn't do this, and she can be like, honey, I don't care what God says. I don't believe in God. So now what? Now I can't say anything to her because my whole idea was based on my religion. And so I wanted scientific evidence to back up my belief.
I studied this in detail for different reasons in the past, and I was actually really surprised by some of the conclusions or some of the things that you put in here regarding the pheromones or regarding that women make bad choices as far as men partners because pheromones are off and they're not picking good genes. That could be really detrimental for society. What part did you find most interesting?
What I found most interesting was how it affects women's brains, because when we think of hormonal birth control, we think of, well, here's our brain and here's, you know, our uterus. They're two different things. But, and the book I read, This Is Your Brain on Birth Control, she was even surprised. She's a psychologist, but she went to this talk and they said, well, taking birth control can actually affect women's response to stress. And she went, I'm a psychologist. I've never thought that it can affect women's brains in a certain way. And I really found that interesting, and especially with the oxytocin signaling, because that can lead to a lot of postpartum depression in women if they cannot bond with their newborn babies after they are born. And so that was the part I found really interesting. And there's actually a lot more how it can influence women's brains, but I only had 20 pages. So I could not go into further detail.
So I noticed in here most everything is very science and factual. Did you come across a lot of personal stories and just leave them out, or did you purposely leave out personal experiences, or did you just not come across those or not research those?
So I did come a lot of women who were expressing their personal experiences with hormonal birth control, but I didn't really want to add it in because I felt like maybe hearing it from a doctor might influence people more, but there were definitely a lot of stories, and I kind of wanted to share one. It was in This Is Your Brain on Birth Control. Dr. Sarah explains that she had a friend call her, and she was having like a mental breakdown. She just recently went on birth control, and she started having like this mental breakdown, and she was questioning a lot of things. She even said, which is a little weird, can I cut you open to see if you're actually living? That was a question that the lady asked her friend. And so they immediately rushed her to the hospital, and they were doing a bunch of tests, and they asked her, have you had any changes in like your health? And she was like, well, I just recently went on hormonal contraceptive. And he was like, well, I highly, highly doubt that that is what is influencing you right now, but we're gonna recommend that you go off of it for a while. And so she ended up going off of it, and she went back to normal. She didn't have any issues anymore. She wasn't going crazy in her mind. And I thought that was really interesting because it may not affect certain women to that extent where they go crazy, but it may bring questioning into women's minds, and they may be like, well, I don't really think it might not be my hormonal birth control. And then maybe they go to their doctors, and their doctors are like, well, you know, it's fine, it's just how women's brains work. And so, anyway, to conclude it all, there was a lot of different women's experiences, but not a lot of experiences that went on the inside of their body, because it was a lot of outward experiences, but I wanted things that had to do with how it affects them on the inside also. And so there wasn't a lot of word of mouth from women that how it affected their the functioning of their body, that they could at least tell.
In your research, did you find, you know, based on, you know, how you talk about doctors advise women to use hormonal birth control and how there's these negative effects, did you find in your research any other instances between, you know, women to doctor relationship where doctors were ill-advising women to utilize certain products, not eventually, but unfortunately to their detriment?
So there was one woman who was explaining her how she used it, and her doctor prescribed it to her to go because she had painful symptoms, so like cramping, like bleeding, and so she did go on it for a long time, but that actually led to a problem she ended up having afterwards when she came off of it, because she ended up becoming infertile. And the doctors, I don't really know what actually was wrong with her, but they believed that the hormonal birth control covered up these symptoms that her body was expressing through whether it be cramping or bleeding. And so she ended up becoming infertile afterwards because doctors prescribed hormonal birth control, which just ended up covering up those problems that she had. So, yes, there are a few cases like that.
I have a related question. You said on page 17, when women have problems with their cycles, it's the doctor's job to remedy these complications. How would they do that without birth control?
Well, I think they actually need to find out why these women are having these symptoms. They need to actually do what they're supposed to do as doctors, which is to have these women have better health. And that's not gonna just, they're not gonna have better health by just having birth control as a cover-up. Because it's just, it keeps putting women in the part of their cycle where they no longer ovulate, so they don't get pregnant. And so it just masks that these symptoms, that when it comes to the time of their period, these symptoms start showing, and those are red flags. But the doctors don't want to address these red flags, and so they kind of just cover it up. But I don't necessarily blame the doctors, because there's not enough research on how women's bodies properly work. Even in its history, George Pincus and John Rock didn't fully understand how women's bodies work, but they decided that, well, I'm gonna start messing with their hormones, and something that they still didn't fully understand. And so we've built on this foundation of not understanding women's bodies to here we are now. We wanna address these issues, but we haven't still gotten to the root of our problem. And so in order for us to like fully be able to help these women, we need to be able to fully understand how women's bodies work. And more research needs to be put into that.
And I was surprised to read in here that it was not until 1980 until there was any reasonable knowledge of a woman's menstrual cycle, and yet they had been doing what you described well before that.
Yes. That was also very shocking to find out that. Yeah, it's very sad.
So in your research, what was one of the, is there something that like stood out that was new and different information than you expected?
I guess it would have to go back to how it affected women's brains. Cause just that whole topic, that whole idea of that it can affect their brains, because our body is filled with hormone receptors. When women go on birth control, it's not only gonna affect the reproductive parts that doctors think it's gonna affect. It's gonna affect how our brain is signaling to another part of our body, that's gonna signal to another part of our body. So this whole three-part is now affected because of the hormones that they put into these pills. And so I think that was fascinating to to hear that the different hormones that go on and the different communications between our body parts and how that's all affected by this one little pill or patch or ring, etc. that is hormonal contraception.
In the, jumping all over here, but page 2, when you, I think you're quoting Singer, who says the most serious evil of our times is encouraging large families. Wow. And the fact that she had so much traction with that, and set off this whole movement. Do you see any parallels with, more a political agenda there as well? Or maybe a social agenda? With the eugenesis in particular, I guess.
I'll definitely see in young women nowadays that they definitely don't want big families, and it's very sad because like people they'll ask me and I'm like, how many children do you want? And I go, I'd like to have a lot of children, and they go, I don't want a lot of children, you know. And it's very sad, but I think it's also sad to think how Margaret Sanger felt that way because she didn't think of that way in the first place. She experienced a lot even in her own life that made her come to this conclusion that big families are bad, because I explained that she comes from a family of 11 children and that she believes that her mother died from carrying too many children. And so this trauma that she has kind of sparked this really big movement in our society, and it's definitely affected women today and a lot of women I talk to because they don't want big families. And it's sad to say, but it all comes from the past.
And I heard that a lot growing up, and my parents' generation were very much against a large family. You only had children if you could afford that child, and you were very judicious in how many kids you had. So it was very influential, this mindset here. And most of our friends felt similarly, and we didn't even question it. That was the sad part. We didn't question that belief.
So when you were researching, did you find that it was easy to find information on it or difficult to find information? And how accessible is this information to the public?
So when I was researching, I first obviously went to the internet. And when I was looking up, I was like, well, let's just start with birth control in general. And so when I was looking for it, there's a lot of people who are like, oh, it's great for you, it prevents pregnancy, it does all these different things. And I was like, okay, next one, let's see what they say. It's the exact same thing all around. I wouldn't hear any differing views on it. It was always all good. And so it was hard for me to find negative until I was like truly researching, until I came across this book, which is This Is Your Brain on Birth Control, and it was by this doctor. And it's not all her own research, because she even believes that a lot of this research isn't open to the public. And that's actually why she made this book, because she as a doctor and a researcher herself has access to different doctors' researches that it's not open to the public. So I actually really loved her book because it found a lot of research that I could not find online. And even if I went to the back of the book to find the source and I were to look it up, I couldn't find it online. And so it was very hard to find, and even some books, it wouldn't really go into the science behind it. It was women's personal experiences, and I'm like, that's great. But I need science, I need facts, I need reasons why. And so that one book I found was definitely a lifesaver when it came to writing this.
Which kind of begs the question, are you hopeful that this information will get out to a larger audience? Because this is not something we as women see in general.
Yeah, I would love actually, not like, I would love it if women could find this information, but even women are hesitant to find this information. Like, I asked my mom, because this was during the time when people who weren't vaccinated couldn't go into libraries, so I had to, hold the book. And my mom went to pick it up because I was babysitting at the time. And she told me that the lady that was giving her the book gave her a dirty look as she was handing her that book.
My perception.
Well, I believe your perceptions, Mom, because they are true. But we as women are even scared to know the truth because, I don't know, we just don't want to address it. We're like, yeah, I'm fine where I'm at with what I have. And so I would love it if this information could get out to women, but ultimately, you're gonna have to change the women's hearts before you give them this information.
True. So in doing your thesis, and because in reading your paper, the saying of just trust your doctor kept popping in my head, right? So because for your paper, that's kind of where it starts as far as the practice of hormonal birth control. Is, just trust your doctor. So given that past and kind of where we stand now with COVID and starting to see side effects of COVID, how detrimental do you see that saying possibly playing out, of people just going, oh, just trust your doctor?
Oh, just trust your doctor. That's a scary one for me, especially because how I've grown up. My mom's always told me how, yes, Mom, I'm using you as another example, that my mom is supposed to know what's best for me, but yet there would be these doctors coming in, it's like, well, she needs this shot, she needs this, she needs this, and she'd be like, no, my daughter doesn't need that. I know what's best for her. And so, even like back then as children, trust your doctor is scary. And so now with COVID and everything going on, trusting your doctor is even more scary. But when I was researching, I was actually finding a lot of women on social media, whether they be doctors or like dietitians, who are advocating like women need to understand their bodies and there need to be more doctors willing to do that. And I was actually really surprised that there are a lot of women out there now who want to do these things. They're like, yeah, there's a lot of doctors out there lying to you with these different ideas, but I'm here to help you with the natural way to do things, to fully understand how your body works. And so, yes, it may be scary, but I think we also need to find those doctors that will be there for us. And a lot more of them are coming out now, is what it looks like to me when I was researching, that a lot more women, I'm sorry to say the men doctors kind of don't get us at sometimes, but a lot more women doctors are coming out saying that they're willing to help, which I am happy to hear about.
So overall, what conclusion would you like us to take from this information, and going forward, how, as women, what are you hoping for? And
What am I- Well, I'm hoping that hormonal contraception will not be a thing anymore, but that doesn't seem to be the case, as they're trying to come out with a male hormonal contraceptive at the moment. But to take away from all of this, ultimately I just want people to be educated with the truth. So that's kind of my stance, and at the end of the day, I do not want hormonal contraception to be used, but ultimately I want women to be educated, I want women to know the truth. I want them to feel comfortable in their bodies and understanding it, so that they can move forward with their lives instead of constantly in this unknown of, oh, I don't know if I'm gonna feel this way at one day because of my body, or things like that. Ultimately, I just want women to be able to feel comfortable in their own bodies and happy.
And safe as well.
And safe, yes, safe.
Okay.
Any more questions? Audience, do you have any questions? Zoe, you have a question?
I actually have two questions. We can go ahead and so the first one is, do you think that hormonal birth control as of now is still being used in a sort of eugenicist way? And second of all, do you think that there's any motivation for doctors to not be discussing the negative side effects with their patients?
Okay, so your first question. repeat it, please?
So do you think that today, hormonal birth control is still being used in a way to sort of further this concept of eugenics?
Well, I mean, doctors aren't handing it to women. Yeah, and I hope you only have 2 children. They're not saying that. But it's kind of implied in our education. If you go back to it, they're like, well, here's how to have safe sex and not have children and not have too many children. So it all goes back to our education. Yes, the doctors may not be saying that, but our education system is. And so, yes, this kind of sense of that we're overpopularized and eugenic things are still happening, but not coming from the doctors, but coming from our education system. And your second question, I don't remember, I'm sorry.
So, yeah. So why wouldn't they tell the women that there's negative side effects?
Well, how much do doctors make when they prescribe it to women? How much money are they gonna make actually fixing women's problems, or how much money are they gonna make just prescribing it to women and women using those prescriptions from them? I think ultimately is what it comes down to, because I researched, and there was this doctor, I can't remember his name, but he went in front of there's this congregation of all these doctors, there's a big guy speaking, and he had a question, and he said, well, why aren't we addressing that hormonal birth control is considered a carcinogen and it's increasing breast and cervical cancer in women? And the guy speaking went, we don't need to address that. That's not something we need to address. He kind of brushed over that topic. And so, yeah, at the end of the day, it's kind of where doctors make more money. Sad to say, but that's what I've seen or believed.
Plus, you're going up against big pharma.
Yeah.
I mean, this is everything is anti-pharmacy. And I will say, in my experience, I think doctors do explain some of the side effects, but the list is so long, the little papers that you're like, okay, it just sounds like you're rolling the dice, and it doesn't matter. You're probably 1 out of 1% going to have an issue. So. I think your paper really highlights those issues are larger than they're being portrayed, and I think that's where the problem is.
Yeah.
So, with your passion and what you've found, do you foresee yourself either going into the medical field to make a change and an impact for good, or being an advocate to get the truth out there? I know either of those is easier said than done because of going up against big pharma and the popular opinion, which isn't necessarily truth.
So I don't necessarily see myself going into the medical field. It's not for me. It's not something I would particularly enjoy. But I don't know. Advocating is more, I think, my style, and something I've noticed with how I live my life is I like to advocate for people, or for the little people. Any other questions?